everyone, I'm Simone, and here are some of today's headlines briefly. All right, the past 48 hours have been pretty frightening and bizarre. There's this huge manhunt underway to find the person or people who mailed explosive devices to the Clintons, the Obamas, George Soros. A total of 10 have been found, mostly sent to Democrats. One was sent to John Brennan at CNN's newsroom here in New York. And authorities have no solid leads yet, but they're saying all the packages came through the mail in these manila bubble wrap envelopes. Also, the devices were so poorly made, officials can't tell if some of them were intended as hoaxes. And then the return address? Well, whoever sent them listed Debbie Wasserman Schultz and misspelled her name. She's the former chair of the DNC and current U.S. representative who had her emails hacked back in 2016. Now, officials are currently looking into whether some of the packages came from Florida. All right, President Trump condemning the political violence and also calling for civility at a rally in Wisconsin last night.
As part of a larger national effort to bridge our divides and bring people together, the media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone.
Now, Republican Senator Ben Sasse struck a different tone with his response, calling the president out for his attacks on the media.
I was glad to hear him explicitly condemn the violence yesterday. We don't refer to the press as the enemy of the people in America. And so we need the president and we need all other public officials to be reaffirming that basic idea about what unites us as Americans.
Right. Look, there could be more packages out there, so authorities are telling everyone to be careful, but so far, no one's gotten hurt. All right, when all the Kavanaugh stuff was going down, one woman came forward with some pretty shocking accusations. Julie Swetnick claimed she was gang raped at a high school party, and she claims Kavanaugh was there when it happened. Now, none of the four witnesses named by her attorney, Michael Avenatti, could vouch for her story. Well, now Senator Chuck Grassley is asking the DOJ to investigate Avenatti and Swetnick for 3 separate crimes, including making false statements to Congress and obstructing a congressional committee investigation. Now, Swetnick made her allegations in a sworn statement to the Judicial Committee, but then in an interview here on NBC, she backtracked and contradicted her initial statement. All right, switching gears here, guys. China's responding to claims that they're eavesdropping on President Trump's cell phone calls. Their solution? Get a Chinese phone. And that was after they called the report fake news. Now, this is all because of this New York Times report alleging Chinese and Russian spies are bugging the president's cell phone so they can get inside his head. But wait, I just have to share some of the other quotes from China's foreign ministry spokeswoman about all of this. So she said the authors of the Times report are, quote, sparing no efforts to win the Academy Award for Best Screenplay, and suggested Trump could also just cut off all contact with the outside world to avoid any security issues. All right, according to the Times, these bugging allegations came from American intelligence data, and that report also says Trump aides have apparently warned him about security concerns with his cell phones. But the president, however, tweeted the story is totally off base. He says he only uses government phones and barely uses one anyway. All right, now on to that caravan of several thousand Central American migrants making its way through Mexico. And there's another one following closely behind. So the migrants from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala are pushing through brutal heat, disease, and exhaustion. Some of them are fleeing violence. Others are seeking better opportunities. Now, we're hearing reports that large numbers have already turned back. And President Trump has been talking about this caravan a lot lately, and now he's prepping to send as many as 800 troops to the border. Officials say the troops won't be in riot gear, though. Instead, they'll be working on logistics behind the scenes. And Guatemala is strengthening their operations, too, as another wave of migrants might be coming in from El Salvador next week. So some members of the Honduran Migrant Caravan violently forced their way through the Guatemala-Mexico border as they climbed over barriers and tore down fences. And if you're wondering how all this caravan all came together, well, we'll have more on that in just a second. But for now, those are your headlines, briefly. All right, there have been a lot of questions surrounding how this migrant caravan came together. Is someone trying to make a political statement out of this? Is it funded by rich Democrat and political boogeyman George Soros? Here's the thing, Soros does fund groups that help migrants when they're already in the country, but we haven't found any evidence that connects Soros and his foundation to this caravan or previous caravans we saw earlier this year, other than one organizer on the ground right now named Alex Mensing, who used to work for a Soros-funded group 2 years ago. But again, he no longer works for that group. And for the record, Soros and the Open Society Foundation deny funding the Migrant Caravan. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's go to the rest of the story on how the caravan began. And for that, we talked to our friend Steph from Axios.
While we don't know a lot of the details about who was behind this caravan and how it really got started, what we do know is that it started with a much smaller group of immigrants in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, which until 2016 was known as the murder capital of the world. The migrants left San Pedro Sula more than a week ago, and since then they've traveled and crossed the Honduran and Guatemalan border, where they picked up Salvadorians, more Hondurans, and some Guatemalans. Over the weekend, the migrant caravan reached the border between Guatemala and Mexico along the Suchiate River. At this point, they had around 4,000 members of the caravan, and again, they started with around 160. Mexico had sent immigration officials to the border to stop the caravan from crossing. Mexico allowed 100 visas every day for these immigrants, but some people don't want to wait. This image is of a Honduran migrant who's holding up tickets for his visa that Mexico was handing out. He decided to wait in line and to go into Mexico legally. But getting these visas into Mexico both allows them to stay in Mexico legally, but it also doesn't prevent these migrants from still continuing on their journey to the US border. Not everyone wanted to wait to get a visa to go into Mexico legally. We saw videos and images of migrants jumping off of the bridge into the water to swim across the Suchiate River and cross into Mexico illegally. It was faster, but it's also illegal and more dangerous. This image is of the caravan leaving Ciudad Hidalgo, the Mexican city on the other side of the Suchiate River. The closest port of entry for the caravan is in McAllen, Texas, but that's still more than 1,000 miles away from where they are right now. The smaller caravan we saw earlier this year, they went all the way to the Tijuana-San Diego border, which is off the map. That would be a significantly longer journey for the caravan that we're seeing now. Since the weekend, they've continued on their journey north and also grown in numbers. Now the caravan is about 7,000 members, and they've made it to the city of Huixtla in the Chiapas region of Mexico. By now, the caravan has traveled a maximum of a few hundred miles. But to make it to the US, they have at least 1,000 miles to go, even if they choose the shorter route to McAllen, Texas. If they choose the further route to Tijuana, that's that much further that they have to go. We're talking about weeks, if not more than a month, before the caravan reaches the US border.
All right, the first Somali refugee might be making her way to Congress after the midterms. Ilhan Omar is part of a wave of female and minority candidates that have the potential to really reshape what Congress looks like. Dasha Burns hung out with her on the campaign trail.
This is a story about breaking new ground, but it's also a story about contradictions. It all started on November 8th, 2016. Relax, this isn't another story about Donald Trump. It's about her, Ilhan Omar. But here's the thing, on the same day Americans elected him,
I think Islam hates us. There's a tremendous hatred. We have to get to the bottom of it.
they also elected her, a headscarf-wearing Somali refugee Muslim woman.
We did it!
Since then, hate crimes have been on the rise nationally, but so have female candidates, and minority candidates, and minority female candidates. So how is it that anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, not to mention anti-women rhetoric is so prominent, but candidates like Ilhan are more successful than ever?
In 2016, I realized that in this district we were being represented by someone who, unlike me, did not realize how hard it was to have a conversation with your black son about what it means to behave once you are being pulled over by the cops.
So she ran and ended up in the Minnesota State House. Now she's a Democratic nominee for the state's 5th district, Congress. And considering the last time a Republican held that seat was 1963, there's a pretty good chance she's going to Washington. You're going to be the first Somali American in Congress, the first refugee from Africa. one of the first Muslim women, the first woman in a headscarf, and the first woman of color representing Minnesota in Congress.
Yeah.
Did I get them all?
I think you might have gotten.
Okay, that's the one. That's the part I was most nervous about.
It's really exciting, I think, to be someone who others can see themselves in all the multiple identities that I represent.
Ilhan's family fled the civil war in Somalia when she was 8. It's funny. You might not know it from looking at us, but my own story isn't all that different from Ilhan's. I left my home country of Ukraine when I was 8 years old and moved here, and I am an American. I think for some people who were born here, sometimes they might struggle to understand how someone who wasn't born here could be as eager to participate as they are.
We love this democracy only in a way that someone who has experienced the absence of it could.
Maybe that's partially it. Maybe the reason candidates like Ilhan are succeeding is because that perspective, it's refreshing. I called David Hopkins. He studies campaigns.
Dave Hopkins.
Do minority candidates campaign differently?
They often do approach politics differently. Some minority groups are vulnerable to being stereotyped, and so sometimes minority candidates have to really take that on and introduce themselves personally to the voters of their districts.
Ilhan's not totally foreign to some parts of her district. It includes a Somali neighborhood known as Little Mogadishu, but it also includes neighborhoods like the one we're in, which is pretty affluent and about 85% white. Your campaign is sort of a living, breathing counter-argument to a lot of narratives we hear in politics right now. Narratives like millennials aren't engaged.
Nearly 50% of my constituents are under the age of 24, and so no one thought that they show up and they vote. And I believed that if they had someone have a conversation with them about what's at stake, that they would come out and vote, and they did.
In 2016, 37% more people voted in Ilhan's election than the one before. That's a lot.
For every dollar that we spent on advertisement, we spent $4 talking to people. That's how we built this campaign.
How old are you?
I am 21 years old. I am the youngest campaign manager of any statewide or congressional campaign in the state of Minnesota. It's not just that we want to see young women and young people run for office and people of color run for office, it's that we want to see them bring us with them.
The youth vote has been key for her, and something about Ilhan has really connected with younger voters, especially at the University of Minnesota. Why has Ilhan galvanized all of you?
Because she's here right now. She's listening to us right now.
She's just here for the pizza, though.
Yeah.
Are you seeing enthusiasm from your peers about voting, or is it a challenge to get people to engage?
I mean, it's always going to be a challenge, but I think there's more enthusiasm than we've ever seen before.
People are pissed off this year.
Yeah. Every politician wants to know, how do we get the youth vote? How do we get the youth vote?
Getting the youth vote is actually talking to the youth. Sometimes we're like pulling teeth with politicians, like sending like multiple emails to their campaigns. We didn't have to pull teeth to get Ilhan here. Like, that is how she got the student vote.
Politicians in the past that try to engage with youth just don't know how to have the conversation. It's usually like, so did you know that you don't vote? The conversation should really be like, hey, did you know that voting for this candidate can help reduce the amount of money you're paying for groceries every month?
So, I know I said this wasn't about Trump, but it kind of is. Ilhan's getting up close with voters. Trump got to them on Twitter. Both are circumventing the usual system. And there's another contradiction. It might be they're succeeding for the same reason. They're both doing something different.
All right, guys, back to those explosive devices sent to Democrats this week. As investigators pour through the evidence here, our tech reporter, Ben Collins, is doing his own due diligence, too. Ben, you're going to tell us how you've connected the dots between the contents of one of these packages and this meme that started online a few years back. But first, just want to start by making this abundantly clear. We are not going to speculate at all as to who sent this or why. We're leaving that up to the professionals. But I do want to focus on the backstory here. Walk me through the evolution of this meme.
Sure. It started in 2015. There was a guy who made it for this website called worldnewsbureau.com, which is like a parody news site, like a fake news site, intentionally fake news site, if you will. It's a right-wing blog, basically, from 2014. Now, do we know that's where this guy got this from, or whoever sent these bombs? Not necessarily, right? They could have Googled a really specific set of terms that would have led them to this, right? They could have found it on other websites. Other people used it as their profile picture and stuff like that.
So this ISIS parody flag was a pretty widespread meme.
Yes and no. So
okay.
There is the diaspora that you see with most memes, where it goes to 4chan and then you see it on Twitter and you get trolled by it and all this stuff. That did not take place here, right? This was a contained thing that was, just didn't take off because it wasn't that interesting, probably, frankly. But it did show up over the course of the last 4 years in different parts of the web.
Okay. So then how do we get from that to then being able to identify this meme on this bomb that was sent to John Brennan?
Sure, pretty interesting story on that. So first of all, reporters yesterday thought this was an ISIS flag. They saw the photo of the bomb that was tweeted by CNN, and they were like, this is clearly a black and white flag, kind of looks like script, like what's going on here? I think it looks like the ISIS flag. Over the course of the day, some people on the internet, frankly, people on like Twitter and a bunch of like shady websites were like, I'm not sure that's it. I think it's this other flag. It looks like the get her done flag, and it did. You could kind of see that the Arabic script was definitely not Arabic script. It was, in fact, this thing that looked like, a bunch of ladies in the middle over there. You can see it now. And look, that's what happened. We asked a senior law enforcement official, and they confirmed that's exactly what was on the bomb.
So I know you're super plugged into online forums. What are people saying about the resurfacing of this meme right now?
Sure. First of all, like the places where they're really into trolling and iconography like this, they didn't know about it. This is not on the, people who use weaponized memes, basically. This was not one of them, so they're not really aware of it. They're totally of the mindset of, again, you've probably seen this today. It's just, this is a false flag, all this stuff from, right-wing Twitter about motivations. That's all they're talking about. They're not looking at this meme and claiming it as their own. So the person who initially authored this meme, where's he now? Yeah, he's a guy in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's, we got a note from him in the middle of the night last night when we reached out to him, and he, blamed the bombs on liberals or something like that, and said he's looking forward to whoever catches it or whatever. But he doesn't have anything to do with this, probably, because that's how memes work. A guy makes something, goes out on the internet, pretty much anybody can grab it and print it out and put it wherever they want, and that's, in this case, it was a bomb.
Okay, got it. All right, Ben, thank you so much. Ben Collins, everybody, thanks for clearing that up for us.
Sure, thank you.
All right, guys, we also wanted to catch you up on a big story kind of rocking the tech world right now. So Bloomberg Businessweek published a story earlier in the month alleging China infiltrated hardware of Apple, Amazon, and dozens of other companies in a massive surveillance campaign. So they say Chinese spy chips were allegedly used to gather intelligence and trade secrets, but Apple and others are calling for a retraction. Our senior tech editor, Jason, caught us up.
All right, so Apple's really angry, Amazon's really angry, and nobody in the world seems to be able to find these tiny microchips that China supposedly put on motherboards in servers across the country. So this all started a couple weeks ago. Bloomberg had this big story. It's called The Big Hack, how China used a tiny chip to infiltrate US companies. It caused a firestorm across the tech community. Cybersecurity professionals were scrambling to try to figure out what it was about. But it's the kind of story that people have been waiting a while for. People were really worried. Yeah, there's a lot of software hacking, but what about hardware hacking? What about people actually getting into the computers, many of which are made in China, and getting at us through that way? So this story made a big splash, but since then, skepticism has turned into criticism, has turned into people calling on Bloomberg to retract the story. So recently, Apple CEO Tim Cook did something pretty crazy, something I've never seen him do, never seen Apple do, calling for a full retraction. The reason that's a big deal is it's not just a denial. People who've worked in journalism, they've had people try to deny their stories before. It's kind of part of the job. What this means is that Apple's willing to go on record to their shareholders in front of the SEC. This has financial implications for the company, and say, no, you got this wrong. We don't know what you're talking about. Amazon has also come out and said, no dice, we haven't found any such thing. You need to retract the story. On top of that, even places like DHS, which runs a lot of the country's cybersecurity, have said, we really don't know what they're talking about. We're trying to look into it, but there's not much. And the company itself, Supermicro, the company that makes the hardware that supposedly had the chips, they're denying it too. So it's tough to know what to believe. If you look at some of the experts, there's a great podcast called Risky Business. These guys are cybersecurity professionals. If you listen to it, most of it's going to go over your head. Most of it goes over my head. But what's been interesting is hearing their reaction. At first, again, they were kind of shocked. They were like, this is amazing. This is a huge, huge deal. If this is true, it's going to rock, the U.S. tech community to its core. Now, more recently, they've been basically coming out and saying, like, we think it's bunk. We think Bloomberg needs to step up and say something. All right, so check out what these guys said.
We interviewed Joe Fitzpatrick, one of the only technical experts named and quoted in the piece, and he told us that he felt very uncomfortable reading it.
All along, though, Bloomberg stuck by the story. They've said nothing but, we believe our reporters, they have the sources, they know what they're talking about, the story's legit. We haven't seen any legal action yet. That's a pretty aggressive step. We don't know if we're going to get there. But for now, it's still a story that's like blowing up in the cybersecurity community. Nobody knows quite what to believe, but Bloomberg's really kind of on an island now. They're sticking by the story, but they're pretty much all alone.
This week, President Trump signed this big water infrastructure bill. It's a rare bipartisan victory, and this new legislation will fund improvements to our drinking water systems.
This bill authorizes needed funding and tools to enhance our coastal ports and improve drinking water treatment, storage, and delivery.
The Republicans and Democrats who worked on the bill say it'll also provide resources for schools to remove contaminants from their water. You know who could use some of that new federal funding? Detroit Public Schools. Just as kids were heading back to class this year, tests showed elevated levels of lead and copper in at least 33 of the 52 schools there. Students still can't even drink from the water fountains. And the reason why Detroit Public Schools started testing their water in the first place is because of Flint. Michigan's health chief is still tied up in legal proceedings for his role in that crisis. And by the way, guys, experts have been telling people there for months, it's okay, you can drink the water again. But a lot of residents are like, nah, I'm good. And here's why. They've been here before. Okay, as soon as Michigan's Governor Rick Snyder switched the water source to the Flint River back in April of 2014, folks knew something was very, very wrong. Almost immediately, the water turned straight up brown, and kids started breaking out in rashes. 4 months later, in August of 2014, the city finally admitted, yeah, the water may have some bacteria in it. But after just 6 days, Flint leaders told everyone, hey, we flushed out the system, y'all are good. Then, a month later, oh, so when we said you could drink the water, we actually meant don't drink the water. Now, that advisory lasted for a total of 4 days, and then once again, health officials said everyone was in the clear. Now, this happened over and over and over again. It's poison. Psych! And Flint officials loved drinking the water on TV to prove their point.
Are you ready to drink it?
Yeah,
okay.
My family and I drink the water every day, so.
Why? Why would you do that? The governor, the former mayor, the health director, no one really came clean until all that national media attention forced them to. And that was well over a year after leaded water started pumping through Flint. At the peak of the crisis, guys, the water in some homes showed lead levels so high, it actually classified as hazardous waste. And the city also tried to downplay the presence of other stuff, like cancer-causing byproducts. So now here we are 4 years later. The government slapped 15 officials with criminal charges, 5 of them hit with involuntary manslaughter for deaths related to the crisis. But somehow Governor Snyder still has a job. And you know it's bad when your Miss America contestant calls you out.
From the state with 84% of the U.S. fresh water, but none for its residents to drink, I am Miss Michigan, Emily Sioma.
Look, the water in Flint does meet federal standards now, but that doesn't really matter to a lot of people who've lived through this nightmare. I mean, so many residents have vowed never to drink or bathe in that stuff again, so it's literally just sitting in the pipes. And here's the thing, 18,000 old lead pipes still need to be replaced in Flint. that's not going to happen until the year 2020. Maybe sooner with this new water infrastructure bill. Nevertheless, the city stopped handing out free bottles of water in the spring of this year. And now Flint's largely low-income population has little choice but to take local politicians at their word. Look, who knows how much all this is going to cost in the long run? $400 million to fix this mess? Maybe even over $1 billion? But there's one thing money can't buy, Flint, and that's your people's trust. Well, that's our show for tonight, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.